CBD is the second most prevalent active ingredient in cannabis, derived directly from the hemp plant. With CBD being legal and used now in over 45 states, it's important to explore, to the best of our ability at this time, what it does and how effective it is. A scientist named John Heaney has been studying the effects of CBD for many years. Along with his partner, Kirby Hammond, they formed Nucuralife, a company originally founded to help veterans with PTSD, physical pain, and extreme inflammation. Within a very short time, they realized that with some key chemical and metabolic changes, they could untap the full potential of CBD and help millions of others manage their health in a more productive way. As always, a very special thanks to my patrons who make this podcast possible. If you enjoy listening, please subscribe and visit my website, barrykibrick.com, to become a patron or just to get in touch with me. I appreciate hearing from you, and I promise I will answer all of your emails. Now, let's take a deep dive into CBD with Chemist John Heaney. John, welcome to my podcast. I am so grateful to have this opportunity to chat with you. I've been wanting to look into this topic of CBD and all the benefits and the difficulties that are involved with it. And we'll discuss later how we came about getting to know each other. But for now, just thank you for your time. And I'm so grateful you're here.
Well, thanks for having me on. It really is an honor to be interviewed by you. I'm quite pleased.
Well, let me tell my listeners how this started. My son was literally playing video game online with a dear friend of his, and he told this friend that he was experiencing a lot of back pain and a lot of sort of mood swings, but nothing serious, but back pain and mood swings. And his friend said to him that there's something you have to try. And he told us about Nucuralife. And this, again, I want to make everyone know this is not an endorsement. This is just a conversation with the scientist who came up with this new form of how to metabolize CBD, but that's how it happened. And then my wife also began to experiment with it. It's a legal product. We bought it online, and it's working so wonderfully for her that I did the research through my son to find out who came up with this and how could we let the people know as much as we can about CBD, about the legalities, the twists and fates. And I just couldn't think of anyone better than one of the chemists who have literally been messing with this since they've been legally allowed to do so. So that's really, John, how this all came about. And that's our jumping off point. And so I guess what I want to start with is you realized that taking this medical plant like hemp, and you felt that there was a way to untap its potential that wasn't being realized.
Yes, there's been people studying CBD since the late 60s, and especially so in the last 10 years or so. And one of the things that's been very evident, it was back in the 60s and 70s, was that CBD had a very short lifetime in the body, in the bloodstream, maybe 15 minutes. Also, it's not very well absorbed. It's not absorbed quickly. It's not absorbed completely in the gut. So the idea was all the things that it promises and doesn't quite seem to deliver really could be improved if the metabolism of the CBD could be slowed down. So that was really the impetus for this. So there was some interest in what it was doing in relationship to THC and in the complexities of ingesting that plant. But the basic goal was to improve CBD's longevity in the body.
Well, you just brought up THC, which is the other plant, so to speak. And you told me earlier that the difference really between hemp and marijuana is almost, it's so subjective because they really kind of are the same product to some extent, but there is a slight difference that one's makes it legal and one's not. Am I correct?
Right. Well, you're correct, but it's a regulatory technicality. There really is no difference between hemp and cannabis, other than the law has defined hemp as cannabis which contains 0.3% THC or less. In other words, the THC content is too low to really produce any of THC's effects if the person were to ingest it or smoke it. So it's a regulatory division. It's not really a plant division. It's not a separate plant. It's the same plant.
So when basically all our founding fathers, from Washington to Jefferson to Franklin, who wasn't even a big farmer, to Adams, they made it, in fact, a very important plant, hemp, in the colonies, and really utilized it in a variety of ways for hundreds of years until the late 1900s, when it, for political reasons, decided to be banned. So I found that an interesting, concept as well, that it was ingrained in our founding fathers as far as their lives were concerned, and as far as what they planted on their properties.
Yeah, they made edible grain from the seeds. They made oil from the seeds. They used the plant fibers for not only rope but clothing. It really is a very versatile plant, and they may have smoked some. They may not have. Who knows? That wasn't really recorded in the history, but it's almost certain that they were growing strains that were selected for their material uses rather than their psychoactive ones. So they probably were pretty low in THC content. But again, we don't know that for sure.
Now, the first thing that you wanted to do was you went after, as you said, the minor components, aiming to improve them and their interactions. So again, when the Food and Drug Administration said 5 years ago or so that you guys now can experiment with hemp and the part that is not THC, you decided that there was some minor components that you could improve, and it would therefore improve the interactions of the CBD itself.
Right. You could see 7 years, maybe 8 years ago, that the laws were going to relax some. And that's been a steady process since that time. States started legalizing, at least within the state, some use of cannabis. Then the Farm Bill came out, and that pretty much legalized everything that was hemp derived. And again, hemp being based on the arbitrary 0.3% THC content. So as soon as that Farm Bill came out, enterprising chemists of all sorts have been going to work trying to make anything and everything they can out of hemp-derived materials, mostly CBD, but also CBG and some others. And their focus has been to come up with a new and legal high that they can market profitably. So they've been putting everything on the market that they can. And the DEA has come out and said that this is basically legal, that everything, Delta-8 THC, for example, an isomer of the normal Delta-9 THC, that can be made easily from CBD, from hemp. So that has come on the market, and they've been asked point blank and have responded in writing that they will not prosecute Delta 8, THC, or any other hemp-derived material. That those are not considered Schedule 1 as isomers of THC or analogs of THC, and they will not be prosecuting them. So that came out maybe a month or two ago, a few months ago. That's a really remarkable opening of this market.
But the key, though, still was what separates the product from other products was that you realized there was a way for it to be metabolized differently, and you had to figure out that the metabolism was one of the keys in being comfortable with these materials and how they could then be absorbed and last longer than the 3 to 15 minutes that normal CBD lasts for.
Right. Let's talk briefly, if I may, about the difference between the two strains of cannabis, cannabis sativa and cannabis indica. Sativa is the one that is grown mostly in the Western Hemisphere. Indica is the one grown mostly in the Eastern Hemisphere. And the indica is almost pure THC. And as a result, people get inebriated from it within seconds of smoking it. In the case of sativa, it's a very complex mixture. Along with the THC, there's up to maybe 200 or more other cannabinoids. And these change the effects of the THC. It was known late 60s that the CBD was interfering with the metabolism of the THC and delaying the metabolism of the THC, so that the effects were different. THC itself is a euphoriant. It's not a depressant. It's similar to a strong cup of coffee in that you have an uplifted feeling, your mood is brighter, the world seems nicer. It's a mild euphoriant. The first metabolite of THC was called 11-hydroxy-THC, is what people associate with the effects of marijuana. You have the stone, the depressant effect, the impairment of physical and mental capabilities, couch potato, hunger, all these, what to some extent society considers negative effects, are not the THC itself. They're the first metabolite. And since indica, cannabis indica, doesn't have any of these other cannabinoids in it to any great extent, that metabolite forms almost immediately. And so people that smoke indica get stoned very quickly. People that smoke sativa or otherwise ingest sativa are getting, like you said, a 3 to 15, 20-minute break before that metabolism happens, during which they have this uplifted THC effect. And THC also, in its unmetabolized form, that seems to be where most of the medical benefits are also. So that was our impetus for this. I realized that these other components that were delaying the metabolism of the THC were too short-lived to really have any significant impact. And that if their activity could be extended, then we could delay or even prevent the metabolism of THC, stop it from going to the negative stone side, and keep it in the unmetabolized form, the actual THC, to where you would have the beneficial effects, particularly the medical effects. So that was the impetus for this work. So first it looked at CBD and figured out how it fits into the receptors, and also how it fits into the enzyme that is metabolizing the THC. There's a family of enzymes called cytochrome P450. There's thousands of them. Each has its own shape. It grabs onto things that fit into those pockets. And the same one that metabolizes THC, like CBD and CBG, but it's more attracted to them. So it grabs them first, and only after they're metabolized does it start metabolizing the THC. So that was the target. I went after this particular cytochrome P450 enzyme, tried to design something very closely related to CBD, but changed in a way that the enzyme couldn't easily degrade. At the same time, you can't change it so much that it doesn't fit into the receptors that it needs to fit into.
And
so go ahead.
All this time, though, you are working within the legal framework that is outlined by the Department of Agriculture. You're not using, you're re-engineering the hemp CBD that you're allowed to work with, and that's legal. Am I correct?
That is correct. I, of course, had this idea a long time ago, but the time wasn't right to work on it. The laws didn't really allow that. Once CBD became legally available and could be easily purchased, that really was the point at which I went after this. Basically, I was able to take the CBD from hemp and make small chemical changes to it. So we're using CBD from hemp and adding small groups chemically to them that block the attack points that the enzyme was using to oxidize the CBD. These changes, these groups are small. The changes are small enough that they don't affect how the body sees the CBD. It interacts with the receptors just the same as the unaltered CBD. But when the enzyme grabs a hold of it, it can't chew it up quickly. And as a result, we've got something that shows CBD activity, just the same molecule for molecule as natural CBD. But now, instead of lasting 15 minutes, we have different versions of these, by the way, but the different versions last anywhere from an hour to 24 hours in the body.
Let me tell people again, this is, I'm not endorsing this. I do not use this. As I said, my son and wife have had some, very wonderful results from this, but this is this is a company that you and your partner formed, and the company is called Nucurolife. That's NUCURALIFE.com if they want to check this out. And again, this is not an endorsement. This is just because I want to bring out these facts, like you even mentioned to me, and that I've read. Israel's been studying this since the 1970s. We've only just begun 5 years ago. And it is so important because we still don't even have a clue of all the positive or even all whatever negative might be. But what motivated you in particular and your partner, Kirby Hammond, was that Kirby was a veteran who saw that many of the veterans coming back from the Middle East conflict were in desperate need for something that would not be an opioid, that would be able to relieve their emotional pain as well as their physical pain, especially when it came to inflammation. Inflammation, as we know, is the core negative thing that our bodies do to us. And so the basis of this formulation of this company, Nucurolife, was to really help at first veterans who were experiencing major pain from shrapnel and bullet wounds, as well as the emotional effects of PTSD.
Right. That is correct. That was our initial focus. I had talked with Kirby about this before starting work, and I said, if I can get through proof of concept, are you interested in this? And he said, very definitely. So I went to work. I made two versions initially. The first one lasted about an hour, which really wasn't adequate. The next one actually turned out to be one of our best ones. That's about a 24-hour version, and is long acting enough to be active orally. So that was our proof of concept at that point. These things were tested initially for activity by a few experienced cannabis smokers, those that know the difference between the effects of indica and sativa. And we took indica, because it doesn't have the other cannabinoids in, and put some of this with it, and they tried it, and they noticed that they were getting no indica effects whatsoever, that they were just simply having the initial sativa effect, and that it was prolonged and never went into the stone phase. Pretty quickly after that, people were noting pain relief also. They noticed that the extending the action of the THC was improving the pain relief also. So we had some clues pretty early on that these things were doing what they were supposed to do, that they were blocking the enzyme responsible for THC metabolism, tying it up for a while, and leaving the THC in the unmetabolized form where it seems to have most of its benefits.
So when you were working with this, you told me something interesting, and I want to share it with others because this has an effect, in my opinion, outside of anything what CBD and what we're talking about. Is I fell in love with your philosophy of education. When I was grilling you about, your background, you gave me a philosophy of your education, and I would just love to hear the philosophy that you thought would help you help others, because you did say you had to make use of your God-given gifts, but your philosophy of education was very different from what we actually experience. And I think the more we listen to what you're saying, I have a feeling it's going to improve our educational system as well, because there is some great advantages that we've lost over the specialization of life.
Right. Well, first off, I mean, both my parents were, from long lines of very intelligent people, and they knew pretty quickly that I was an unusual child. My mom made a point of telling me very early, no matter how smart you are, there's always someone smarter. Don't get a swell head. You're just one person. And even if you're smarter, it doesn't make you any better than anyone else. So that was an early piece of upbringing. Secondly, there's a lot of people that have a lot of talents, and not just intellectual. I mean, these talent can be anywhere across the board. There's a lot of very talented people that don't do anything with their talents other than just use them for their own comfort and convenience. And this was another thing that my mom told me. She said, you, like everyone else, has God-given talents, and you're responsible to God to use them to the best of your ability. So I use them not to relax, but to push myself harder in terms of learning more and ultimately accomplishing more. When I would study, say I would go to the library in later years. I was going to the college library when I was about 12, and I would go with 1, 2, maybe 3 pieces of information that I was trying to find. And I would hit the journals and read, and I might spend 2 hours there researching those few items. But what I did is every side road, every distraction, I followed those to their logical conclusions, learned everything I could about those things, and then would come back to the main path and keep going until I found another distraction. So I might go to the library planning on learning 2-3 things, and I would end up learning 20 or 30, not necessarily related to what I was seeking. Higher education, as people become more educated in the school system, they tend to become more specialized. You might start off as a chemist, and then you get your PhD in a particularly, say, in pharmacology, and then you go maybe into postdoc work, and you take a very narrow piece of the field, and you become more focused and more of an expert in that one little thing, but your focus has become narrower. And I went the exact opposite direction in my learning, and I tried to learn everything I could about as much as I could. And the more educated I got, the more diverse my knowledge became. And that, I think, really is the key for this project. Chemistry is a relatively small part of what I did. Obviously these things had to be made by a chemist, but a good knowledge of pharmacology, particularly drug metabolism, was essential. Biochemistry, both human and of the cannabis plant, played a role, as did molecular biology. There's just many different parts went into this. Concept from folk medicine, particularly Chinese medicine, were useful in understanding the interactions between the different cannabinoids. Then once these compounds were in hand, the medical knowledge, particularly general medicine, sports medicine, physiology, disease pathology, and medical history too. All these related to how these products could be used. So it's unusual to find somebody with knowledge in so many different closely related fields. If I just gone into this as a chemist, I couldn't have done it. Normally a team inventing a drug, new medicine would be a team. It might be 100, 200 scientists, and you'd have a department head for each of the disciplines that I mentioned, and they would have a group, and they would get together, and they would have to brainstorm this until they were thinking of one mind in order to come up with this concept. I had an advantage in that, having information about all these different disciplines, I was able to formulate the idea on my own and then pursue it on my own. It's very unusual. Normally this would be a very large team with a very large budget, and I did it as a single person on a shoestring.
Now, you though are protected by, and we won't get into what it is because that's not my job here, but you have a patent pending on the mechanisms that allow the metabolites to slow down. And part of Nucura Life is to protect that patent and to do the best you can. But you do know, you are aware that these things get out, and it's very difficult to keep a handle on it, especially now with the internet and everything going on. It is difficult. But what's so funny is you really almost care more about it actually getting out than anything else anyway, because you believe so deeply in the benefits that can be provided once we really do understand how this is metabolized.
Right. Well, obviously, we want this out on the market. We've seen that it's helping people, even in the early stages. We've seen that it was helping people. So as soon as we recognized that we had a discovery, we filed a patent. I'm still waiting to see the patent application published. But everything is slow in government right now with COVID. So I haven't seen that it's been published yet. And people will see it. I mean, it's not a secret what we've done. We don't want it kept a secret, but yes, we do want it protected, and did file a patent, and that's in the process of working through the patent pending
and
process.
Just so my listeners could know, I want to give out the website again so that they can, look more into what you're about and what the product is. It's called Nucuralife, Nucuralife.com. And again, this is not an endorsement of the product. I just think that with all the research being done now, we need, as a society, to be more aware of all the possibilities, because especially as we're even dealing with this pandemic of ours, that we're realizing now how much science is important to our understanding. And that's why I do want to even begin this conversation on something that could have a potential to literally revolutionize the medical industry. And I thank you for that. Again, though, what I want to do, though, is this brings up an interesting situation, because we have to be so much disclaiming this as anecdotal. The reason is because it's been so prohibitive for us to study this for the last 100 years. That's the sadness. That's what I wanted to, if I want to draw something out of this, forget about the CBD even. I say that there's a major problem with any form of prohibition in a free society. It stops us from learning all we can about either the goodness or the badness, however you want to look at it. It prevents knowledge. And it seems that in a free society, the one thing that everyone from the beginning of time, from Socrates, said, know thyself. The one thing is education. And when you prohibit something, and even now at some of our universities, they're prohibiting certain types of speech. They're prohibiting, it cannot be. In a free society, you must have the ability to investigate, to probe, to question. That's all we're doing here. And in fact, that's the impetus of what made you even begin to study the CBD that you developed, is that freedom to think on this level.
Yeah, as a scientist, particularly, chemist, I had my own lab when I was 11. 11-year-olds don't go buy chemicals. You could get some things over the counter, but it was very difficult. And even as an adult, freelance work was very difficult. People didn't respect people having their own laboratories, and chemicals were almost impossible to obtain, even for legitimate purposes. So restrictions, I'm not in favor of those. People are scared of scientists. Scientists come up with all these inventions that society has no understanding of how to use properly, and often they end up getting misused. But it's society and the people in charge that misuse them, not the scientists that created them. I agree. Some things really, you can look at them and say, okay, there's no good can come of these. This should not be researched. But in general, scientists ought to be free to do what they do best, and then let society figure out how best to use them.
Well, John, again, I want my listeners to know that this information should never be used as a substitute for direct medical advice. You really need to always see your doctor or qualified clinician. You always make that same disclaimer. I do want them to be able to be sure to check out what you have on your website, so they could make that as part of their study at Nucura Life. But I also urge them to really check out as many websites as they can so that they know also, what's going on, as I did prior to this. That's what led me to you, was checking out so much information that I wanted to meet someone that I thought would be able to clarify this, and you and your company seems to have offered me that opportunity. So, John, I just want to thank you so much for the work you've done, but more importantly, for the time you've spent with my listeners and me today. You really helped put a lot of this into perspective, and it seems like we're only at the very beginning of this horizon that could be, without even exaggerating, could be revolutionary.
Yes, I really expect that this has the potential, the probability to revolutionize both the cannabis industry and the medical profession.
I just read today, before we even got into this conversation, a reprint from the Harvard Medical School and their journal. And they themselves are saying how, in fact, I'll even quote it. It says, cannabis, however, consists of about 600 different molecules, some 140 which are called cannabinoids, because they work on our body's endocannabinoid system. But once again, they're saying that, unfortunately, and this is a quote from the journal, much of the data of this newly discovered compounds is going to take some time and high quality research to determine if there really are benefits. So that's what I really want to get us to, is so that we are no longer just waiting for the anecdotal, but we're able to show that there is a benefit to it, or prove there isn't, one or the other. And again, you seem to be as cautious of this as well, and I'm grateful for the work you're doing, and I'm grateful that you shared it with our audience today.
Well, thank you.
The one thing, John, and I know that you agree with it because you're the one that even wrote how cautious we need to be. Let us know the cautions that you've taken, and since you're offering a form of this, what you've done to protect the consumer.
Right. Well, first of all, I don't believe in guinea pigs. So anything that I've let anyone else have, I've tried myself. That's just a point of ethics. Secondly, a major concern when designing new medicines is their ultimate fate in the body. You need to know how they're metabolized, if they are. Some drugs are not metabolized. They're just excreted unchanged. But you need to know how the body is getting rid of these things, that it's being metabolized, it's not building up in various organs or just system-wide so that it could cause damage. As I mentioned, there were a number of these. I think I had about 6 in hand at the time, 6 different versions of this that had different durations of activity. And from that information, I was able to put what's called an SAR, a structure-activity relationship, together. And that was sufficient to determine how these things are being broken down. It turns out that they're not being metabolized at the normal sites that the CBD or CBG would be metabolized, but one of the groups that's attached is getting metabolized and broken down to a carboxylic acid. So basically, the initial metabolites of these things are very, very closely related to cannabinoid acids. You've probably seen CBD acid and CBG acid recently being marketed. These are getting broken down to compounds of the same sort. The natural cannabinoid acids are non-toxic. They're easily excreted because of the polar acid group. So once we knew that these things were being broken down to cannabinoid acids, very closely related to the natural ones, we're very confident that there would be no toxicity issues. And indeed, we've had people taking up to 1/4 gram a day of these. I would not recommend that to anyone. That's an excessive dose. But we've seen essentially no ill effects from these things. So I think we're pretty safe on that. We know what the metabolism is, and we know that it's getting broken down and excreted.
Well, that's how we started this. It was all about the way you've dealt with the metabolism. And John, again, I want to thank you for shedding light on the overall need for us to do this research on CBD and even THC, and for the work you're doing at Nucura Life. And, you know, again, with a goal of at first helping our veterans and then releasing it to the society. But as a service to our listeners, once again, I'm going to say, do not substitute going for direct medical advice before you take anything or do anything. But I thank you, John, and your company for taking the time to be with me and my listeners today.
Thank you very much, Barry. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more, please subscribe or become a patron of the show at barrykibrick.com to keep it going every week. Thank you.